questions in the chat, and we also love reactions, so go for it. Optionally, you can share your name and organization in the chat, but we'd like to see who has attended today. And please don't use automatic transcription or AI tools. As I previously stated, this recording will be on our community charging webpage. Here's our NEVI team. There's Derek and Colton and myself. And if you afterwards would like to contact us, please use this email that will reach all of us. On our agenda today, we'll talk about EV registrations and updates as we see how EVs are adopted across the state. We are going to talk about our prior NEVI funding rounds, what we've done thus far, and then we'll get into community charging for the Southeastern region. At the end, we'll take questions. I'll read questions out of the chat and we'll get some answers for you. So at this time, we'd like to take a poll, a couple questions for you, if you don't mind. We hope you participate. Derek?
All right, we'll go to the next question. And one last one for you here. Thanks a lot for the participation. We really appreciate it. good number of what survey answers, so we'll try to hit on that one later. Thank you, folks. We'll close the polls here. You can go ahead, Dorothy.
Okay. All right. Our next slides have to do with Pennsylvania registrations across the state. Here's some historical statistics. As of the summer, 1.5% of motor vehicles are electric. That's a good trend. We're watching that go up. Here's a map of EV registrations in Pennsylvania. This is an interactive map that you can find on our NEVI website. And it has, it's interactive so that you can go in and search for county level or by zip code. There's also historical data that you can get by county level and zip code. As you can see, in the Southeast region, almost half are in the 5 Southeast counties that we are talking about today. And now I'll hand it over to Derek to talk about NEVI.
Awesome. Thanks, Dorothy. So I'm going to go through and give you a little bit of level set for what NEVI actually is, kind of what we've done to date, and where we're going next with the program. So NEVI, we're going to say that quite a bit, stands for National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. NEVI is a formula fund. It's a formula program out of IIJA or BIL, as you may have known it. And it apportions $171.5 million to Pennsylvania over 5 years to build out EV charging infrastructure across the entire state. Through that, we had to come out with a couple of plans that we submitted to FHWA for review and approval over time. And that unlocked the funding each of those federal fiscal years. So $36.5 million each of those. We've gone through and gotten approval for all of our plans thus far. So that means that all 171.5 million is now available to Pennsylvania to spend through different funding opportunities in Pennsylvania to build out EV charging infrastructure. So with that, the initial rounds of the program had to focus on what we called our AFCs, or alternative fuel corridors. We had to build those out. So what that meant was building a charging station every 50 miles, 1 mile off of the denoted alternative fuel corridors. The AFCs were largely our primary interstates in the state and a couple of U.S. routes, such as 30, 15, 1, and 422. So once we got through those initial rounds, we were able to request build out. I'll talk about that a little bit soon. So those initial projects, they were really serving fast charging projects. And fast charging, DC fast specifically, looking for 4 ports, CCS connectors, and at least 150 kilowatt power per port. Again, I mentioned it had to be every 50 miles and 1 mile off of the exit. We have since worked on those projects and built them out through previous funding rounds that we did under NEVI. So we'll call those either our AFC rounds or our corridor-focused projects. And you can see here a map of all of those projects that we have awarded in the prior 4 rounds now in this map. So we did go through and we have 95 projects in 48 different counties. It did apprise about $63.4 million in federal investment. And this is also an interactive map, so you can go on, you can see exactly where these are located, the current status of the project, whether it's planned, in design, or operational. And you can go in and see what level of investment each of the projects also received. So this was the prior projects, the 4 different rounds of NEVI that we had put out, awarded, and have been working on for about the last 3 years now. We do now have 31 of those projects operational. So here's a nice large list of where all of them are and what projects site hosts are for each of those locations. a couple pictures here of three of our early on sites that did open up. So at 31, we're very proud to say that's the most out of any state in the country, and we're very proud of our program and the progress we've been able to make with NEVI. So again, this is just another one of those funding opportunities. We're looking to get out and get projects awarded and opened and available for the public to charge their vehicles. Over time, we've collected usage data out of NEVI. There's required reporting, so we've pulled this out and into cumulative data as shown below. So we do update this quarterly and post it on our website. And since the initiation of our NEVI program and opening of the first station all the way back at the end of December of 2023, to the end of December of this last year, we've had 80,000 successful charging sessions at our NEVI sites. So really proud. We're happy with those numbers and gotten quite a bit of electricity dispensed through these stations so far. I mentioned earlier that we had to achieve full build out, and really what that means is we went through and we built out all of the required stations every 50 miles along our alternative fuel corridors. We then had to submit for approval for that, and as of this last fall on 9/22, we received approval for our full build out request. Really what that means is now we have greater flexibility to invest the remaining NEVI funds that we have not spent thus far. So out of that, about 120 million total dollars did remain after our AFC rounds, and we are looking to now invest that into what we're calling our community program. So to detail that a little bit, we are looking to invest those across three different funding opportunities. The first of those is Corridor Connections, which actually recently just closed, and we announced awards for that first initial community framework program. Corridor Connections really was serving as sort of a AFC light, or a kind of similar program, getting DC fast charging out along some corridors that were not nominated as AFCs, but we were looking to have faster charging along some of our corridors. Some of those specifically, my mind goes to Route 6, for example, in that northern tier of the state, where we know longer distance travel is happening and we still need some of the faster charging infrastructure out there. What that brings us to next is community charging, which is really exciting. This is going to be the bulk of where we put the remaining funding for NEVI. Really what we're trying to do with this program is get out into our communities, open up a lot of flexibility to build level 2s, to build DC fast chargers, all across the entire Commonwealth. So we're opening up for eligibility in pretty much any location that is publicly available. And we'll be detailing today our first release of the community charging program. So that's going to focus on the Southeast region. The last of these would be critical investments. This is kind of a holdover item. If we have any priorities left after the first two funding rounds, we'll look to fund projects if we missed something that we find crucial across the state. Just a couple examples could be things like medium heavy duty charging, charging at state facilities or other locations that we didn't feel got enough attention through the first two rounds of the community framework. So that brings us to the NEVI community funding rounds. Give you a little summary here of what that program is going to look like before we dive into more details. So I mentioned we have about $100 million we're looking to put across 4 different funding regions for the community charging round. So what that will look like is 4 different initial funding opportunities. The first today being the Southeast that we're talking about. We'll follow that up with a Western region and then a Central and Eastern region. All publicly available locations in Pennsylvania are eligible. I mentioned that earlier. We're really looking to open this up to get a lot of interest and get projects out into our communities. Any organization registered to do business is eligible for funding. And again, NEVI, just like prior rounds, we will provide up to 80% of the cost to design, install, and operate the EV charging stations through this program. So we have 4 regions. Today we're talking about the Southeast region. The funding opportunity for that was just released almost a month ago now. So on February 19th, we had put this out. The deadline for that one will be to submit by August 21st. And we expect to do award announcements for this in the fall. What will follow is the other 3 regions. So the Western region, we're looking to put that out sometime in April or May. So keep an eye out for that if you're interested in the western part of the state. Then we'll follow Central and East, which we're hoping to do together, and we'll put those out sometime around August or September of this year. So we'll be really busy over the next year trying to get out, awards and projects selected for about $100 million of funding through this program. We have a lot more information on our website. So we created a convenient and easy to remember URL. So if you go to pa.gov/EV community, you can find all of this information in a lot more detail, and a lot of your questions certainly will be answered there as well. So feel free to use that resource. Again, on the website, we have a number of things. So there's a flyer, there's a survey. So we took that poll earlier asking if your organization has completed the survey. So what we're hoping to do with that is help organizations connect with each other as they're looking to work on NEVI proposals together. So you can go on there, indicate what your interest is in NEVI, what role you would support, and you can also see in the completed file that we have on the website other companies or interested parties that would like to be part of projects. And ideally use that to sort of start building your teams as you look to apply for the funding rounds. We do have a map again, the same one I just showed on the previous slide up there. The same timeline again is on our website. We'll update that over time as sort of these dates start to get locked in. We'll upload this presentation and a copy of the video of this presentation. And we also have a short summary presentation on there. A much shorter version of this trying to summarize the program. Lastly, there's information and resources available for the funding opportunities themselves. So important dates to remember, frequently asked questions, and different resources for things that you need to know as you go to apply for the funding round. So this brings us to what we're focusing on today, the recently announced Southeastern region of the community charging funding opportunity. We also have a specific webpage for community charging. So again, as you go to the pa.gov EV community, you'll get to all of this. On there, you'll find the actual funding opportunity document. It's quite large, but in there is every resource and all of the proposed terms and conditions through the contract. Everything that you would need to know about applying for the grant is in that document. We do have it coupled with a priority map. So we went to work with our local transportation planning organizations, and we worked on a prioritization strategy of where we hoped to see some of these projects funded. So in there, you'll see a map of locations that we worked together with DVRPC and the City of Philadelphia, the local transportation planning organization, on locations that we hope to prioritize with the funds. We'll talk about that a little bit in more detail coming up, so I don't want to focus on it too much yet. There is a required utility form, so you have to submit and try to get the project in with the utility, with the proposal. So in there, it would be for DC fast projects with the connection of 150 kilowatts or greater. So just keep an eye out for that if you're planning to do a larger grid connection for that project. Again, coupled with that, there's utility contacts that we provide. So go on the website. There's some resources for how to get to your local utility. And then lastly, a link to find EVITP certified electricians. So again, sticking with the federal rule, these projects do require that the certified electricians are used. So a lot more detail on that requirement in the funding opportunity, but also links to find certified electricians are on the website as well. So hopefully we've pulled together all of the resources anyone would need to pull together a project. All that really is covered quite detailed on the website. But again, happy to take questions. And as Dorothy mentioned, you can reach out to us at our email address. Okay, the funding opportunity, I've mentioned this a few times now. In there, you'll find a large number of things, but really at a high level, the sections of the document describe the program. They go into the procedures and eligibility, program requirements, and proposals. So really, that's going to be your main source to refer to as you look through and prepare for application for the program. Other things in there to mention, there's a proposal questionnaire, so you can see the kind of things that you'll be asked when eGrants opens for submitting a proposal. The scoring rubric that the team will use to evaluate the projects and score them for selection. The utility form I mentioned on the previous slide. Final site design checklist, so that would be after award and as you're working towards your project design and prior to going to construction, the things that we will review prior to providing approval for going to construction. Davis-Bacon wage determinations and again a draft of the agreement for the community charging program. So next, I just wanted to go through the timeline in a little bit more detail. I mentioned that we released the funding opportunity back on February 19th. Next, we're here today hosting the webinar, so that's March 12th there, the second line. The deadline for submitting utility forms to the utility will be mid-February 26 to early August 2026. So you can start doing that now. And then the deadline to submit technical questions that you might have for today will be May 18th. So we'll take more technical questions after the webinar. You can email us if you have anything, and we can get those posted on the website for everyone to see. The biggest one to keep note of right now on June 1st is when we will open eGrants for the online proposals. So a lot of your time now will be spent on teaming, trying to figure out where your projects might be, and working on some of that criteria that you would submit in the grant proposal. So again, you can see that stuff in the funding opportunity document. Get ready for it, and then we will open on June 1st to start accepting proposals. And then the deadline for those proposals will be August 21st at 5 p.m. sharp. Next, we will conduct the proposal review that will happen in the fall. So anytime between August and October, we try to get those done within 90 days or so to make announcements. And that award notification would happen around likely November of this year. After projects are selected and they go towards agreement, PennDOT does complete the NEPA process. So that's the Environmental Protection Act. We would complete the required environmental reviews for each project as we work with you towards agreement execution. Ideally, we get those agreements executed for selected projects early 2027, around January to February. And now I will turn it over to Colton to kind of go through the more specific details of some of the things I talked about.
All right, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on what part of the country you're joining us from. So we're going to keep diving into details about the Southeast round. We'll have a good bit more info to share with you here. Certainly feel free to continue sharing questions in the chat as we go. If it's really relevant for where we're at, we might interject to get that answered quickly, but we'll get to them at the end if not. So it was mentioned earlier that we have an interactive map. We like those interactive maps. We've learned a couple at you already for this funding round. So for the Southeast region, you can see a screenshot of it there. There's also a link to it on this slide. There's a link to it from our website. But the really important thing is that all publicly available locations in the 5 counties of southeastern Pennsylvania are eligible locations. So we do have some locations on this map that are prioritized both in scoring and selection, but projects in any location are certainly encouraged, and you're not limited to just those priority locations. Feel free to email us if you have any questions about whether a location would be considered within one of those priority locations or not. So also on this map, you see a little bit of like purple shading. When you initially open this map, that won't appear in the upper left. There's a toggle to turn on the community needs score. So feel free to do that so you can see the purple shading, which is also a component of scoring, which we'll cover later. Did want to note that we have in the funding opportunity notes about how we're not looking to have EV charging that is duplicative with stuff that's already out there. We do want to be expanding the EV charging network. So when you zoom in on this map, you can see all of the existing level 2 and DC fast charging public stations in the area. So just keep that in mind and feel free to reach out if you have any questions on whether a station would be duplicative or not. We also have a more detailed section on that in the funding opportunity in section 3B. So we mentioned about 34 million is planned for funding through this region for the Southeast. That formula is basically just based on population per county as compared to the total statewide population. It's a little bit more to it, but it is mostly population based. So that being said, it also does go down to the county level. You can see that just based on the fact that Philadelphia has the largest population in the state, they're also planned to have the most NEVI funding through projects as well. These are planned amounts. It can certainly deviate after we see the proposals that come in. We have information in the funding opportunity about what would warrant having a total amount of awards that are above or below the planned range. But this is just to give you an idea of what we would be looking to do. Note that we have an award cap of 1 million in NEVI funding per project. And yeah, and there'll be additional info on the other regions as those are available, but these percentages are out of the 100 million total planned across the state. So who's eligible? The simple answer is most any organization. So you can't apply as an individual, but as long as it is a government entity, a nonprofit, a business registered to do business with the Secretary of State in Pennsylvania, then you're eligible, unless there's something that would prevent us from awarding federal funds to that organization, which includes a department, a suspension, or an outstanding obligation to the state or federal government. So these are federal funds. We have a regulation to follow, which is found in 23 CFR 680. So that means that there's a lot of rules that go along with it. We tried to summarize some of the more common questions or some of the items that would most directly impact projects. But this includes that you have to have at least 4 charging ports. That means that each station must be able to charge at least 4 vehicles at the same time. Every DC fast charging port has to include a CCS connector. Every level 2 has to include a J1772 connector. You can have other connector types as well, but you must include one of those connector types on every port. The station must be available for public use at least as frequently as the host business or facility is available to the public. There cannot be any access restrictions during public hours. So for example, it cannot be employee only or resident only. It must be available to the public. There's an Energy Star certification requirement for level 2 charging ports. A PennDOT requirement is that there must be at least 2 ADA accessible parking spaces associated with the charger. So essentially at least 2 of that 4 minimum, or if you were doing a large number, it could be 2 out of 12, but there must be at least 2 that are ADA accessible. And you have to have at least 6 kilowatt continuous power from every charging port. A couple additional requirements apply just to stations that are along an alternative fuel corridor, we had that map earlier. It's mostly the interstate highways plus a few US routes. But if a project is along an AFC and it's designed to serve travelers of that AFC, then you must also have at least 150 kilowatt continuous power from each charging port, and it must be available for public use 24/7. So essentially, it would have to be a fast DC fast charging station if it's located and designed for travelers of a highway corridor that's been designated. So that went over requirements on the charging station. Additional things to think about in the implementation and the operations of the station is that there is a minimum of 20% matching funds. Essentially, we reimburse project expenses. We can reimburse up to 80% of the expenses that are incurred by our funding recipient. The other 20% they have to cover from somewhere else. There's no in-kind match or things like that. Equipment has to comply with Buy America rules. You must pay Davis-Bacon Act minimum wage rates for all that are involved in constructing the site. You have to use qualified technicians, namely that electricians have to have an EVITP certification. The program income, basically the revenue that's generated from the station, has to comply with the final regulation, federal rules, namely that there's not like an excessive profit that's made off of the station. There has to be reasonable pricing for the customers. The station has to have an uptime of greater than 97% over those 5 years of required operations. There has to be customer service available during all hours the chargers are available for public use. You have to allow free third-party data sharing via an API, and there's quarterly and annual reporting requirements. So just all those things should be planned for in advance as you think about your costs and implementation of the project. Throughout implementation, there's also a number of deliverables that will require. So after you would have a contract in place, but you receive an award, you get a contract in place between PennDOT and the funding recipient. That's when you would begin the design phase of the project. So of course, you're working on getting towards final design and getting your local permits. We also require a local workforce plan detailing how local labor will be utilized to the maximum extent possible for the project. During the operational phase of the program. So once it's operational and then around the time it becomes operational, we would ask for an operations and maintenance plan, cybersecurity plan, and a commissioning report or similar. And then throughout those 5 years of operations, we have the quarterly annual reporting and annual updates to the cybersecurity plan. Okay, so as you think about what is eligible for reimbursement for implementing the project, the general rule of thumb is if the cost is directly related to the EV charging station, then it can be eligible. We do have a much more detailed list of those eligible and ineligible costs in the funding opportunity in section 3C, but also note that costs have to be incurred after that agreement has been executed between PennDOT and the funding recipient. Anything that you do now or in advance of that agreement being fully in place is not eligible for reimbursement, with the one exception being any equipment that you hold as inventory but allocate to the project after there's an agreement in place. We consider that cost to be incurred on the date that it's allocated to the project, not on the date that the equipment was actually purchased and put into inventory. As you think about applying for the program, as Derek mentioned, our system eGrants will open on June 1st. To submit proposals. But in the meantime, there's lots that you can do, namely reviewing the funding opportunity for all of these rules and steps that we're outlining here, but it's got more info for everything. Certainly make sure that your location is eligible within one of the eligible counties. If it's within one of the other counties of Pennsylvania, then you can plan accordingly for that region's funding opportunity. If you're planning for a utility connection of 150 kilowatt or greater, then you need to do the utility form and submit it to the electric utility. Derek did mention that we have contacts at each of the utilities that are specific for submitting this form. Don't use the general contacts or your normal commercial account contacts. If you use the email address that is specific for submitting these forms, there is not a cost and it's a simplified process for getting a response. You'll want to identify as many of the vendors and partners that you'll use on the project as possible. If you don't know who a team member, as in a vendor or a contractor, will be yet, then you'll want to know at least the minimum expectations that you will have for selecting them when you complete your proposal. Part of the proposal asks for a site schematic. It also asks for a letter of commitment from the site host, which is basically the property owner that they're interested in the project and carrying it forward. And then you'll also have to provide a detailed budget and, of course, a request for an amount of funding to complete the project. Important deadlines as you think ahead. As mentioned, any technical questions we need to be submitted by May 18th. We have already received some technical questions and we have posted those on the website. We will continue to update the technical questions and answers file through towards the beginning of June 1st when proposals become available in eGrants. So that way you can see what questions people have asked and the answers we provided. Submit your utility form if it's needed for your project. And on August 21st at exactly 5 o'clock is our deadline. At 5 o'clock and 1 second, the eGrants will not accept your proposal. The submit button will either disappear or it just will not work, and there will be no way to submit. So make sure that you don't miss that deadline. So among the many resources that we have to help you out in that funding opportunity is a detailed scoring rubric. So here's a summary of the different scoring categories and the points associated with each. But within each of these sections is more detail on how every question is scored. So this is an example showing you how the questions in section 1 are scored. These questions are related to team qualifications and experience and the project approach. This gives you a good idea of what we're looking to see in the proposals to maximize your score and therefore your likelihood of receiving an award. Wanted to highlight here that out of 100 total scoring points, there's a good number of points that are associated with the location of the project itself. There is the community needs score. I mentioned earlier that if you toggle that on the interactive map, it's the purple shading. That can be worth up to 7 points. That just goes by the census tract of the project locations. There is that priority location score. So if you're within one of the kind of green checkered mapped locations, then that's worth 7 points. And then there's also EV charging use cases. We'll go over that more on the next slide, but that's also worth up to 7 points. Lastly, so we mentioned that you have to be available to the public, but it just has to be as frequently as your host facility is available for public use. We are, prioritizing through scoring the locations that are available to the public as much as possible. So if you are 24/7 public access, this is worth 0 points. But if there is very, very limited public availability through those hours, it can be up to a negative 20 point on the project. So we do have a sliding scale for all the scenarios in between there. And the scoring rubric has a lot more info on how this is scored, but just wanted to note there that the level of public access can have a large impact on the score. So we mentioned those prioritized EV charging use cases. This again comes from our local transportation planning agencies, the same ones who set the priority locations for this funding round. But you can see the table that shows the priorities for the Southeast region. So if you address a very high priority level charging use case well, it's at that type of location, it fits that criteria, then that can be worth up to the full 7 points. And then there's varying degrees of still scoring that can be associated with meeting one or more or partial aspects of some of these prioritized EV charging use cases. So you're welcome to consider that as well as you're looking for ideal locations to propose. Sorry, that looks like a repeat here at the top, but then also thinking about your location, we have 16 total points that are related to the site and its amenities. So 6 points are related to customer safety, and then 10 points are related to the amenities. features and nearby destinations for the charging station, highlighting here that amenities, features, and destinations should align with the proposed charging speed and charging port count of the project. So essentially, what's near the charging station should make sense for what's proposed in terms of, what's the typical dwell time for people at this location, and does that speed of charging align with the dwell time that would be expected? Lastly, the single largest scoring element is the funding request itself. To ensure that there's a level playing field between projects that are proposing level 2 and therefore may have a lower funding request with DC Fast that may have a higher funding request but provide a higher speed of charging. Funding request will be on a funding request per kilowatt of charging capacity basis. So we'll consider up to 175 kilowatt of charging speed from every DC Fast charger and up to 13.3 kilowatt of charging speed for each level 2 charger. When determining your funding request per kilowatt of capacity. So there is more information on this in section 3B, but just wanted to highlight that is how we're approaching the scoring for funding request, and that we have those limits there. Okay, so we're all going to be working towards receiving those proposals, scoring them, and then getting conditional awards out, likely sometime, as mentioned earlier, October, November. And then we do always note that if one or more conditional awards are withdrawn, we can offer conditional awards to projects that were initially not selected. So initially getting a non-selection is not always the end. We have a variety of resources related to electric vehicles on our website as well as DEP's website. So there's a lot of things here. I'll just highlight that EVs in Focus video series, that top link. We just unveiled that a couple days ago. There's 3 videos there thus far. There'll be 2 more coming soon. And there's a lot of good stuff here. So feel free to check it out. These slides and this recording will be available on our website after the webinar, so feel free to look at it when you have a chance. But that does take us to questions, and I'll turn it over to Dorothy or Derek to share what we've been getting in the chat here.
All right, so I'll scroll back up here. So okay, first question. If we have EV ITP certificate, but the company is registered in New Jersey, can they participate in PA NEVI, or is it necessary to have a separate certificate for Pennsylvania?
Yes, so EV-ITP certifications, the organization that does that certification is national. They're not specific to the state. So EV-ITP certified is what is. You would not need to have it customized by state.
Thanks, Colton. The next one was how we could add the address to the interactive map to check the priority location against an address. So that is actually a feature we are working on trying to add to the map right now. So it's not up yet, but keep an eye out for that. We're hoping to add that here pretty soon to the interactive map, so you can be able to search by address and make your life a little bit easier there.
If you want to know as soon as that functionality is added, you can send us an email and just say like, hey, notify me when it's there, so you don't have to refresh every day. Yeah, we know that would be nice. So we're working to add it, and we'll let you know when it's there.
All right, next question. Might be a silly question, but I assume the utility wouldn't execute projects until after NEVI funding is awarded and confirmed. Is that correct? And if so, what exactly happens during the milestone to submit the utility form to the electric utility? Does the utility process the EV application at this time to move forward with construction regardless of approved funding?
So they're really separate items. So our utility form is largely to get a gut check from the utility on what power is or isn't available and what kind of cost and timeline it would require to get the requested power to the project location. Whenever it's time that someone decides that they're moving forward with the project, whether they have their NEVI funding in place or not, they would follow the standard utility process of submitting their connection request and going through all that. So this we worked out the utility form process separately with our utilities, really for the convenience of the organizations applying for NEVI funds, so that they can get that easy answer without having to go through longer processes or paying for a basic engineering study. And also so the utilities can just know that someone's just looking for a basic answer here, and it's still a proposed project, not necessarily one that will move forward yet.
Okay, will you be sharing updated GIS files for this map?
Yeah, so I believe if you're on the interactive map that we noticed that the GIS files that it directs you to when you try to download are not the correct ones. That is also something that is in the works and being corrected. That should hopefully be corrected around the same time that we add that the ability to search by address.
So are public school districts able to apply?
Yes.
Regarding the 1 million cap per project, is project defined as individual sites in the application, or is the full proposal inclusive of all sites deemed the project?
Organizations are to submit a separate application for each location. So a project would be on a location basis. So 1 million per proposed location, with each proposal only containing one location.
Can you confirm that private CPOs can submit applications with letters of commitment from property owners or site hosts? Not sure
Yes.
what private CPOs are. Do you know?
Charge point operator, basically a charging company.
Oh, okay. And you said yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. I may know a site that is adjacent to both a priority area and community needs area. If the proposed site is within a certain distance to those items, are those points still available?
So I would look at the scoring rubric to see which things might be distinctly hard and fast by whether you're within the area or not. But if you have any questions, you can also reach out about individual sites and if it would be considered within the priority area or receive the community needs scores, that sort of thing.
Okay, this question is in the Q&A. Haley has sent this in. The latest solicitation states contractors shall report decreases in costs greater than 10% and increases in revenues greater than 10% as compared to forecasted costs and revenues during the period of performance to PennDOT for review and confirmation. This is a change from previous rounds that only noted reporting any material decreases in costs or increases in revenues. Is the updated reporting request in reference to an annual report? If not, how frequently does PennDOT expect it? Additionally, sorry, Colton, is PennDOT willing to revert to the previous language in line with the original NEVI program language? It's a long one.
This edit to 10% rather than material was to just have better context for what material meant. So it's intended to be a clarification on the language that we had in prior funding rounds. It's not part of a set annual report. It would be as it happens. But we can, if that doesn't fully answer things, we can try to get back to you with more info or get into the Q&A.
Okay, the 2 ADA accessible required spaces. Must it only be used by vehicles with an ADA tag, or if they're open, can anyone use them?
So in our design manual that has the requirement for 2 ADA spaces, there's instructions on using used last signage. So essentially, the parking spaces are, available for ADA use, but that if the other non-ADA spaces are full, then they can be used. So it's not restricted solely for ADA. It's just that they should be used by ADA or last if the other spots aren't available.
Would this program be eligible if installed in paid parking locations at an airport?
Yes, we do have a section on what sorts of parking rules or limitations are allowed, and paid parking is allowed. We have a question where we ask you to detail those sorts of limitations. For example, whether it's paid parking or street sweeping twice a month, things like that. But yes, that's still eligible.
Does the use of on-site renewable energy production to facilitate EV charging installations as part of this program contribute to the application scoring in the rubric?
I don't believe we have a question directly on that topic. I would have to review in more detail to see if something is maybe partially related, that you could include that as part of your response.
Since public garages in the city of Philadelphia are pretty much controlled by the PPA, that's the Philadelphia Parking Authority, would we be competing with that municipal entity or others like OTIS? I don't know what that is. If not, what role are they playing in this bid?
Otis is the Philadelphia Office of Transportation and Infrastructure Systems, just for the recording. Go ahead, Cole.
Thanks, Derek.
Sure, thanks. Anyone who applies would be competing. So if they would choose to apply, then everyone would be competing against each other for the funds. It's up to them if they choose to apply directly, if they allow people to apply for projects on their property. That's up to each individual organization.
Did you say that max application request, the grant portion, is no more than 1 million, or was that a minimum application allowable request?
1 million is the maximum per location.
Is there any monetary incentive after the project completion in which a host site receives ongoing revenue or reimbursement after the completion of the project?
So our whoever applies to PennDOT is the organization that plans to implement the project, provide the match, and really be responsible for everything. So if that organization is not the host site or the property owner, then there's a site host agreement, and it's up to those two entities to decide what sort of revenue sharing or monetary transactions occur, and that would be entirely for them to negotiate and determine.
Once I complete the interest form, how do I contact other interested parties to form a project team?
So there's the survey also on that webpage, the pa.gov/EV community. Just below the survey is a link to the directory, basically all of the survey responses. So we update that file weekly with all the new responses that have come in. So you can download that file, see everyone else who has submitted, and reach out to those organizations if any are of interest to you.
To clarify, if the applicant already purchased the equipment but didn't install it, those equipment costs can be eligible. So it's the labor and other associated costs that can't occur until after the grant agreement is signed.
Simply put, yes.
Can applications be submitted based on estimates or bids only?
Yes, so we ask for a detailed budget, which is just going to be your estimates based on what you think the project would require cost to implement. But of course, the most important piece there is the amount of funding that's being requested. So yeah,
Okay, we have a question. It's from Haley, and her audio had cut out while you were answering. But can you confirm, this is about contractors and reporting, can you confirm the timing, quarterly, annually, et cetera, of this report?
I assume that's the program income part about increases and decreases in revenues or cost during operation. There's not like a set time frame for submitting that info to PennDOT. It's just when the event would happen that PennDOT be notified and informed.
Okay, let's see. Oh, this just jumped around. If we use a battery-backed system, does that add points or is there an additional incentive?
There's not a question directly for having a battery system. There is a scoring element for future proofing. There's a scoring element for power sharing. So you can see if that information would be relevant to any of the existing questions in the questionnaire.
Are there any resources available on Buy America compliant L2 EVSC?
I am not aware of any list, so it would be a matter of finding that information out from the manufacturers, as far as I know.
How much time does each applicant have to finish the installation of the charging station after we sign the agreement?
The draft agreement says that the project is to be operational within 2 years after the agreement is fully executed.
Is this a rolling application or will all applications be reviewed after the close date?
It is the latter. All applications are scored after the close date.
Okay.
Another one here, Colton. Will the scoring rubrics and priority use cases be different for each region? So simply put, yes, but feel free to add anything to that with more context, Colton.
Yeah, the priority locations and the priority use cases will change with each region, but the rubric overall itself is to be, most of these funding opportunities will stay the same from one region to another, so that would include all the scoring elements. All right, well, that takes us right to time. We have a lot of questions here that I know we answered quickly on the spot, but for many of those that we may not already have answered somehow, we'll work to get a more formal response into our Q&A file. So that way you have the best information and others can review it as well, even if they don't watch this recording. Again, if there's anything you missed or if you want to share with others, we'll get this recording posted. We thank you all for your time, and we hope we get lots of interest in the program. And again, spread the word. We have resources on the website. We have a flyer. We have 5 very short presentation slides. Get the word out there so that people know that this is their one opportunity to apply for NEVI funds. Thank you all.